Hi, welcome back to the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. We are in section 56 and we are learning what to do when you make a mistake. Mistakes happen, but the educated will know how to respond well. So let's see, we get confused with our brachos, we make some mistakes, how do we correct them? So yesterday we discussed a few basic points. Let's just quickly revise them. To the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. We are in section 56. Sorry about that. So in brief summary of yesterday, the correct bracha over bread is hamoitzi, lechem min haaretz. Hashem brings bread from the ground. The correct bracha for cookies is boirei b'nei mezonos, who gives us satiating foods, and the bracha for pasta would also be boirei b'nei mezonos. One's bread, one's baked, one's cooked. Now let's just discuss the different things that may happen as far as brachas are concerned. So what happens if on bread you said the bracha boirei b'nei mezonos? So what's the halacha? We said yesterday that although it was the wrong bracha to make, because boirei b'nei mezonos is not recited on bread, and this is stacked bread, and this wasn't stacked bread, it was regular challah, regular bread. But since boirei b'nei mezonos refers to food that satiates, and bread also satiates, so after the fact the bracha will work. What about the reverse? What about if one says hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings bread from the ground, and he said it on cookies? Well, are cookies bread? I wouldn't think so. Interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe doesn't discuss this case, but the Kitzur says, as we've learned, that it works. I guess cookies might not be called bread, lechem being bread, but I guess since they're baked, maybe they are some kind of like a sweet bread, a snack bread, and therefore if you said hamoitzi on a baked good, it works, according to the Kitzur. I haven't heard otherwise. What happens if you said hamoitzi lechem min haaretz on pasta? It does not work. Although pasta is made out of wheat or barley, usually wheat, still it's not bread. And the bracha hamoitzi lechem means he brings bread. So since pasta is not bread, that will not work. Okay, what happens if one said, let's move down the track, on grapes? Instead of saying the regular bracha on grapes, which is boirei pri ha'etz, one said boirei pri ha'gafen. Now usually boirei pri ha'gafen is only said on wine. So what did we learn? We said that it works after the fact. It's not the first choice. It's not the bracha that's designated for grapes. But since after all, the meaning of boirei pri ha'gafen means fruit of the vine, so although that bracha was established specifically on the wine, since the bracha after all does speak about grapes as well, because grapes are fruits of the vine, if you made that mistake, it works. If you said boirei pri ha'gafen on grapes, it works. What happens if on fruits you said boirei pri ha'adama? Thank you, Hashem, for fruits of the ground. So does that work? We said yes, because although the fruits are not growing on the ground, they're growing on the trees, they are also growing on the ground because the tree comes from the ground. And so if you said a boirei pri ha'adama on a fruit, it works. What about if you said a boirei pri ha'etz on a vegetable? We said that does not work. Why? Because boirei pri ha'etz means fruit of the tree. Now, do vegetables grow on trees? Absolutely not. Therefore, if you said boirei pri ha'etz on a vegetable, you would need to make a new bracha. Now, having that in mind, we understand an interesting phenomenon, which is if you're unsure whether something is a fruit or a vegetable, you're not quite sure which one is it, then what bracha will you make? You will make ha'adama. Thank you, Hashem, for the fruits of the ground, because if there's no way in figuring out what the bracha is, and it might be a fruit, it might be a vegetable, boirei pri ha'adama will work for fruits and vegetables after the fact, as opposed to ha'etz. So a banana, for example, there's a three-way argument of what the definition of a tree is in halacha, and banana fits between that. Some say it's a fruit, some say it's a vegetable. The halacha is, or some say it's a fruit of the tree, some say it's a fruit of the ground. It's not a vegetable, but some say it's a fruit of the ground. Halacha is, you would say ha'adama, because that covers both. And that brings us to halacha number 3. Okay. Now, if by mistake you said the bracha boire pri ha'etz over wine, so wine usually has the bracha of boire pri ha'gafen. But instead of saying the bracha boire pri ha'gafen, you said boire pri ha'etz. Now let me ask you, does wine grow on trees? Is it a fruit of the tree? Well, yes and no. It's not really a fruit. It's what comes out of a grape. So what do we do if you said a boire pri ha'etz on wine? The halacha is that if you realize as soon as you made the mistake, you correct yourself and you say, no, the bracha is not boire pri ha'etz, it's boire pri ha'gafen. But if you forgot to correct yourself within a few seconds' time, and then that works. You don't need to make another bracha, because wine does come from, it is considered a fruit, and therefore the bracha after the fact, if you weren't able to correct yourself, will work. Okay, and then we come to everything. No matter what it is, whether it's bread, cookies, pasta, grapes, fruit, vegetables, or wine, if you said the bracha of shehakol v'hiyah bid v'roi, which means that everything came into being by Hashem's words, then the bracha works. Because after all, this bracha is for everything. We're praising Hashem for creating everything. So if you said a shehakol on bread, or cookies, or pasta, or grapes, or fruits, or vegetables, or wine, whatever it is, if you say the bracha shehakol, it works. Now some people say, if that's the case, then why learn all the brachas? We have a master key. Why have separate keys for separate doors? If you can have one key that opens up all doors, then use that. If the bracha shehakol v'hiyah bid v'roi works for anything, then why don't we just say that bracha? Well, the answer is, as I've discussed on numerous occasions, that just like when you're thanking somebody, if you can either say thank you for everything, or you could say thank you for your wonderful hospitality, or the chicken was delicious. Obviously, if you specify what it is that you appreciate, the person is much more appreciated. Well, the rabbis instituted unique brachos for different foods, so we could appreciate Hashem in many different ways. If one is to only say shehakol on everything, then we're actually not utilizing, we're not appreciating Hashem in the way that we could have. So the rabbis instituted unique brachos for unique foods, so that our gratitude to Hashem and appreciation and praise of Him is something that is special for each type of item. So one is forbidden, one is not allowed to say shehakol on anything other than anything that doesn't fit into any of these categories. But if he did, he made a mistake, then it works. Okay, now we come to two other principles. They're fairly simple, but it will sound complicated, but it's really quite simple. So bear with me. Halacha number 5. Okay. Now, initially, we learned previously, a few chapters back, that before you start making the bracha, you should have in mind which food you're about to eat. And have that in mind when you say the beginning of the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem. When you mention Hashem, you should have in mind what it is that you're making the bracha on. If you had the wrong intention, for example, if you took a cup and you thought it was wine, and you began to make the bracha, and when you said Baruch atah Hashem, which is the intensity of the bracha, you were thinking that I'm about to say a boire pri ha'gafen on this cup of wine. But before you reach the conclusion of the bracha, you take a look inside the becher and you see that your becher is not filled with wine, it's filled with cranberry juice, or with water, or with beer. So let's say somebody is making kiddush, and they think they're making kiddush on wine, and it turns out that somebody trapped them, and instead of there being wine in the cup, there is beer in the cup. So you can switch to Shakol the Yamid Baray after the fact. So although at the outset you should have in mind which bracha you're going to make, if you had the wrong intention, if you thought you were making a bracha on one food and it turns out it's a different food, as long as the actual words that come out from your mouth are correct, then it works. Even more so, the fact that you ended correctly undoes your intention. Okay, he says, what about the reverse? You thought there was beer in your cup, and you had in mind to say shahakol, and then you discover that there's actually wine, and you concluded Baruch Piakofen. Again, you have fulfilled your obligation. Even if you had concluded the bracha as you originally intended, you will have, okay, this is actually a different point. You will have fulfilled your duty. Oh, okay, fine. That's quite obvious. So we said a moment ago that everything, if you make a shahakol on even wine, although that's not great, but if you did it, it works. So obviously, if you had in mind, you thought you were having a cup of Coke, and you had in mind when you started the bracha to say shahakol, and it turns out that it's wine, the bracha will work, because even if you would have said the bracha you were going to say, it would have still worked, because we said after the fact shahakol works for everything. Even if you completed the entire bracha erroneously, but you became aware of your mistake immediately, and you corrected what you said. For example, if you took a glass of water or beer, and you thought it was wine, and you said the bracha Boyer Pri Hagafen, and as soon as you finished, Boyer Pri Hagafen, you discovered that it was water. And you said Shahakol Diyamid Baray. If the moment you make the mistake, you catch yourself, and you correct yourself, then that works. Meaning that there is a concept that you have 2-3 seconds from when you make the mistake to correct yourself. But if you are not immediately aware of your error, then you would need to repeat the entire bracha from the start. Okay, one final interesting scenario. If you thought you were having wine, and you made the bracha on wine, and then you take a sip and you realize that what you're drinking is not wine, it's water. If instantly you grabbed another cup of wine that was there on the table as well, then that bracha you made on wine can still work, since the wine was readily accessible. But if you're going to run to the fridge and quickly grab a bottle of wine and take it out, or even if you're right next to the fridge and you just open it and you grab the bottle of wine and you quickly pour it and you drink it because that was a bracha you made, that will not work. Because as we've learned, whenever you make a bracha, the food needs to be in front of you when you made the bracha. So if you made a bracha on Boyer Pri Hagafen and it turns out that you don't have wine in front of you, even if within a split second the wine arrived from heaven, you would not be allowed to drink it without making another bracha, because as we've learned, before one makes a bracha, one has to hold the food in one's hand, and if one's not holding the food in one's hand, it needs to at least be in front of him for the bracha to work. But if one first made a bracha and then the food arrived, the bracha does not work, and therefore in this scenario, where he thought he had wine, but really he had water, and he said Boyer Pri Hagafen, unfortunately he will need to repeat the bracha, and he will have, unfortunately, although unintentionally, mentioned Hashem's name in vain. In fact, it would even be appropriate for him to say the final words, Baruch Shem, or say the verse, Baruch Shem, which is the second line after the Shema, which is Hashem, I may have just desecrated your name, but I want you to know that I hold you in the highest regard. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing